You're in the water loop.
Waterloop. Hey everyone, this is Travis with Waterloop. I know a lot of people want to use water-efficient fixtures, but they're afraid they won't work as well. Let me tell you about High Sierra showerheads, which was named Best Showerhead by Popular Science. I just installed one at my house, and I was genuinely surprised at the power and coverage of the water. High Sierra showerheads earn the EPA WaterSense label for water efficiency. They use at least 40% less water than the conventional low-flow showerheads. High Sierra showerheads are constructed out of metal, so there's no plastic involved, they're very durable, and they're naturally antibacterial. One of my favorite things, these showerheads are made in the USA by a small business located in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Get 20% off with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com. Waterloop. Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. Very psyched to talk about rivers today and how they are economic engines for communities all across the country and the world, really. I am joined by Fay Hartman. She is Conservation Director for the Colorado River Basin Program at American Rivers, an awesome organization. Fay, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Travis. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you and hopefully provide some fun facts for all your listeners.
Oh, I'm sure you will. We were talking before we started about our kind of different rivers and different experiences. I was saying that I just spent some time up in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee doing a little bit of rafting, and then an afternoon floating down some tubes down the river, which is always a relaxing time. And you were talking about rivers out there in Colorado and all that good stuff. I mean, they're just amazing, right?
They are incredible for so many reasons. I mean, recreation is definitely one that I'm a big fan of when it comes to rivers, but also, I mean, they provide so many things for us that I think we forget about sometimes. So I'm excited to explore that a little bit more with you later in the episode.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing too, is they have so many different uses for different people. They kind of have something for everyone, right?
Exactly.
Recreationally, but then also for the economy. There's all these different ways they feed into the economy and in just quality of life for communities. So I wanted to, I guess, start with about kind of our current situation that's going on with coronavirus, the economic situation, environmental justice. Just kind of, what are your thoughts on how rivers fit into this current landscape we're dealing with?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's the challenges of public health and the environment and the economy are all interconnected, right? And identifying and coming up with solutions are going to take all of us working really hard together to kind of figure out what those are and then to implement them. I think, one thing when it comes to rivers that we like to mention at American Rivers is that rivers provide over 2/3 of our nation's clean water, right? And that water is used for drinking, for hand washing, very important now, showering, boiling water for food, all those good things. And so knowing that clean water has always been a really important part of public health. But in the state that we're in right now in this pandemic, water and clean water is even more important than ever. I mean, when you look back and you think about the recommendations from public health officials, the CDC recommends that people wash their hands for at least 20 seconds, right, as one of the best ways to spread coronavirus. However, there's millions of people across the United States that aren't able to practice this because they don't have access to clean water in their homes. I think that there's about 2 million people in our country lack access to running water, indoor plumbing, and then also wastewater treatment. And, I think there's a study from the Food and Water Watch that found that 15 million people had their water shut off for non-payment. So in many, different areas, in rural communities and urban areas, water quality is a really big issue and a serious concern.
Isn't that and that's something that I don't think that we can say enough is pointing out that there's 2 million Americans that don't have safe, adequate water coming into their house, right? That's crazy, and I don't think that the average person out there on the street is aware of that at all. I think they assume that everybody's got water. So
Right.
we can keep saying that over and over at every chance we get, for sure.
Yeah, and it's really important that we, again, work to identify solutions for how to fix that. And I think, one of the big challenges around that is that oftentimes communities of color and other historically marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted by the fact that they don't have access to clean, safe, and then also affordable water. So that's another really big issue. I think taking a step back from the pandemic, I think, knowing that COVID is shining a really grim light on injustices in our water infrastructure and the importance of clean water for everyone. I think it's important that, and I think we can probably all agree on the fact that rivers and water infrastructure have been neglected and abused for a really long time, right? This isn't something that just happened overnight. It's something that, we have dealt with for decades. And I think, one of the things is that too many people, talking about what you were just saying earlier, lack access to clean water. And like I said earlier, 2/3 of that comes from our local rivers and streams. And so, centuries of not great river management have degraded our river ecosystems. They've disconnected communities from rivers that traditionally would flow through their backyard. And then again, many of these inequities fall disproportionately on communities of color.
Yeah,
And I think
I was just gonna say, like it's crazy when you look at, especially the past century, how rivers were really just used as the dump, right?
Yep.
As industrialization was taking over and cities were being built, rivers were just like, oh, just throw all the junk, all the chemicals, all the pollution in these rivers, and they were just trashed. And there's definitely been a big momentum to clean them up, but there's, like you said, there's still a tremendous investment gap in revitalizing rivers, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, when I think about, where I live, right? So I live in Denver, Colorado, and we have many great rivers and creeks and streams kind of flowing in and around the Denver area, the South Platte kind of being the largest of them. And for a really long time, like many other cities, the South Platte, wasn't looked at as an amenity for the city, but it's been really exciting, over the last few decades to see that shift that's happened within the city. There's, a number of really amazing local nonprofits that have kind of spearheaded this. The city is involved, Parks and Rec, all of these different things that have really created an amazing place for community members, for tourists to go and play, right? We have an awesome greenway along both the South Platte and Cherry Creek, and a number of the other creeks in the area. There's, this area called Confluence Park where, it's become a really awesome bustling area, and people go there to sit and relax and enjoy, or, play in the little water features that are there. So it's really cool to see, how communities have shifted that perspective. And Denver is obviously just one example of so many communities that have, really embraced their river in recent years.
Yeah, that's the good thing is I think, I was at EPA before for about 6 years, and you just hear a lot of stories about these communities and cities that have been like, wait a minute, we have an incredible asset running right through the middle of our town, and let's reinvest, let's clean it up, let's properly develop around it, and there's a lot of positive success stories I think we can dig into a little bit further, but
For sure.
Yeah, you were starting to go into kind of, I think, the some of the environmental justice angle of the role of rivers and how and what happens there. So I jumped in. So
No worries. I think where I think I was going, I think back to my train of thought was that I think when we think about COVID and the pandemic and the challenges that it's providing for communities across the country and the really, significant impacts that it's had on, the just staggering number of lives that have been lost, and the fact that over 40 million people have lost their jobs, businesses have shut their doors. It's really important that we think about how we can kind of build better and more inclusively as we start to think about, like, okay, how can we come back from this pandemic? And in the wake of this really severe economic downturn, Congress has obviously and continues, I think, to consider massive investments of how they can jumpstart our economy and bring millions of Americans back to work. And from American River's perspective, I think we have an opportunity in this moment to strengthen our communities across the country. We can drastically improve public health. We can put our economy back on track. But we really need to be mindful of how we do that, and ensuring that we do it in a way that we avoid some of the mistakes that we've made in the past, right? So instead of exploiting people and communities, we can think about, in our environment, we can think about ways that we can revive and restore livelihoods, help communities prepare for the impacts of climate change, and then most importantly, begin to heal our country's legacy of injustices.
Yeah. So you all at American Rivers recently put out kind of a report around this issue, and one thing that jumped out to me is it talked about the history of the federal government investing in river and water projects that actually damaged rivers and kind of perpetuated injustices against people of color, these different, Black communities, indigenous communities, Latinx communities, and others. What's that history? What type of, investments and projects by the federal government, actually did damage to rivers and these communities?
Yeah, for sure. So, we talk about in our report, which is called Rivers as Economic Engines, investing in clean water communities and our future. And in that report specifically, we mentioned in the beginning, kind of talking about how, investment in rivers it's not really a new thing, right? I mean, it's when you think back about how Congress and the federal government have kind of have stimulated the economy. It's often through infrastructure and water infrastructure being one piece of those. However, I don't think we haven't done a great. The government has a long history of investing in these in projects in the past that damage rivers and perpetuate injustices against Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other marginalized communities. So I think, we can think back to the Great Depression. The Public Works Administration, one of the kind of big entities that was created during that time, they built really massive dams and other water projects, like the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River, Fort Peck on the Missouri, Grand Coulee on the Columbia, the Upper Mississippi River locks and dams. Across the country, rivers were harnessed, watersheds were degraded, ecosystems were destroyed. And besides that, communities were displaced. I mean, Indigenous people, were moved from their homes, cultural sites were destroyed, and, really important areas, riverside lands, rivers themselves were inundated with water. And then I think, when you sort of look forward from the Great Depression to where we are now, too often communities of color and low-income communities live in floodplains or drained wetlands, or they happen to be in areas that are adjacent to sewage outfalls as a result of historic discrimination. And living in these areas, results in a higher likelihood of experiencing the effects of urban flooding or combined sewer overflows and, the health burdens that are associated with poor water quality. And these areas tend to have, fewer trees and green spaces, which, when we think about a lot of the work that, American Rivers and other, organizations and communities are doing across the country, green spaces and trees help to mitigate urban flooding and stormwater impact. So, there's definitely, a lot of challenges in those areas.
Yeah, sure. I want to kind of dig into this economic side because that's what the report is about that caught my attention recently. Let's start with the negative before we spend tons of time on the positive and solutions, because I like to do that. So when you have a really polluted river, a really degraded river, a river that is not in its natural state, what are the economic damages from that?
Yeah, great question. Lots of answers. So, I think when you take a step back and you think about it from a big picture, polluted rivers have very significant impacts to communities, to the environment, and to the economy. As we said earlier, all of those are related, right? Last summer, the World Bank released a report that found that poor water quality is eliminating 1/3 of potential economic growth in heavily polluted areas that threaten human and environmental well-being. So that's pretty crazy. And that's obviously not looking just at the US, right? That's looking at the entire world. So just note that. But, the combination of bacteria and sewage and chemicals and plastics take oxygen out of water, and then make that water, significantly impaired and at a much lower water quality that then, obviously have really significant impacts for people and for ecosystems that then cause harm to the communities and the economy, because, right, clean water is essential for economic growth. When you think about food production, you need clean water for food production. You need clean water for, good public health. And so I think those are really important things, just kind of on a broad scale, to note. And then, so that's kind of the big global scale. But then thinking about, a little bit more here in the US, and this information is from the Environmental Protection Agency that we found was that, water pollution affects all aspects of the economy, right? So when you have polluted water, it makes treating that water a lot more expensive. The second thing that it does is that, polluted water has really negative effects for the tourism economy. And that's a big part of economies. When I think about economies in Colorado, tourism is one of the big ones, right? According to the EPA, almost $1 billion is lost in revenue around tourism because of water pollution. A lot of that has to do with algal blooms and nutrient pollution, but that's a really big number.
Yeah, that's billion with a B, right?
With a B.
Yeah. Just so everyone caught that.
And then those same challenges also affect commercial fishing industries, right? So, shellfish, all those good things, those also are significantly impacted by poor water quality. And then, real estate, people want to live on healthy, beautiful, flowing bodies of water. Like, that sounds amazing. And I would like to live on a river, right? And that clean water can raise, the value of a home by up to 25%. But, when waterways are polluted, it's the opposite, right? So values can decline because of poor water quality. And so that's another kind of a big piece of that. Yeah. So those are sort of the big numbers. And then, when you kind of moving away from some of the pollution impacts, when we think about, other economic damages associated with, rivers and water, there's very significant impacts associated with flooding, right? So, and flooding can be exacerbated by traditional gray infrastructure like levees, and these economic damages are really expensive. So in 2019, last year, the U.S. experienced 14 unique billion-dollar plus climate weather-related events. 3 of those were river floods. 8 of them were severe storms, and I think there were two cyclones, and that was $45 billion in damages. So that's a lot of money.
That's a
lot of devastation for communities. And that's, I think, the challenge. That's not going away. Those are really significant issues that are going to continue to face communities across the country. And, unfortunately, a lot of the current river management decisions across the country are making a lot of these flooding issues worse. They're allowing for, they're encouraging higher levee building, developing in floodplains like you were talking about earlier. And a lot of these development plans aren't adequately planning for the impacts of climate change, which has really significant impacts, and it's sort of this continuous cycle.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a lot of impacts. And the one that I also think of is, if you've got pollution and you've got people that are, there's health impacts of that pollution, right? And then you've got the cost of healthcare and lost time at work and all that goes with that. That's a whole nother piece as well.
Exactly.
All right, let's make the pivot to the positive stuff, because it's exciting how rivers can be positive economic engines, and there's, like we talked about, there's so many great examples out there of communities that have revitalized their rivers and reaped the rewards. So I think we did touch on how they can benefit the economy. You can go into that in big scale, but do you have examples of places that have, seen those benefits?
Totally. Yeah. So I think, before we dive into the specifics, we'll again kind of start at a higher level and then go down.
Yeah.
But, you mentioned earlier, most of the cities and towns within America have a river running through them or flowing nearby. And that river provides so much clean drinking water, irrigating crops. They power our homes. They provide really important wildlife habitat. And, for a lot of us are that place where we can go to fish or boat or explore or sit and enjoy a picnic with your family, right? Like there are these great places that have so many, quality of life benefits, but that also translates into economic benefits. And, they're not only are they rivers, drivers of kind of a strong economy, but they also create a lot of jobs. And they create a lot of jobs in urban, in suburban, in rural communities. So I think that's an important thing to note. The Pacific Institute released a report, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, that found that there's 136 distinct careers that are associated with water specifically, which is really interesting. And, those jobs vary from things like scientists to, maintenance professionals, recreational outfitters, construction workers, and then communication specialists, right? Like you need people to talk about water.
I agree on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So, those are just kind of some big things where there's a lot of jobs that are associated with rivers and water. And then those have kind of compounding effects for, indirect jobs that provide the materials to, that go towards these jobs that are directly related to rivers. And then obviously they have impacts in the economy when people who have jobs that are related to rivers can then go and spend that money, in their local town or in another town that they go visit. Recreation's a big one. The Outdoor Industry Association found that river-based recreation supports over 1.5 million jobs nationwide, and that's both, the direct jobs and then also the indirect jobs. And then kind of drilling down a little bit more specifically, and I'm a little biased because I live here, but in Colorado, Business for Water Stewardship, who's a really great partner of ours, released a report a couple of months ago that found that Colorado's rivers are a huge driver, economic driver for the state, specifically related to recreation. So, over 131,000 jobs are associated with recreation and tourism in Colorado. And then river recreation contributes $18.8 billion in economic output for the state of Colorado. There's over $6 billion in household income, and then over $2 billion in revenue, so state tax revenue. So like huge numbers.
That's just in Colorado. That's amazing. And we're talking about kayaking and canoeing and rafting and fishing and hiking and camping and everything that goes on there, huh? Wow.
Yeah. And I think, I think that just shows how much people appreciate and, love being in and around rivers, whether it's in their community or a place that they're visiting. So pretty awesome. We were talking earlier about the South Platte in Denver, where I am. And again, I'm sorry for all the Colorado examples that are happening right here. But I mentioned earlier, there's been a really amazing kind of revitalization of the South Platte and Cherry Creek in the last few decades. And in 2017, Summit Economics worked closely with the Greenway Foundation, which is a really awesome local nonprofit here in the Denver area, that found that years of restoration, in and along the South Platte and Cherry Creek, increased property values within a half mile of, the river or the greenways by 36% than other properties in the city. And then on top of that, Denver has collected an additional $64 million in property taxes because of that increased property value. So, it's great because it's not, in Denver, we have these amazing places where we can go and we can, run and bike and, get in a tube if you wanted to, or a kayak or whatever, that provide this recreational amenity, but then it also has a really important economic contribution for the city as well.
Yeah, sure. I'm thinking about my local river. So I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. Our river is the Cape Fear River.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it is one that's at the center of everything with PFAS. It's got Gen X pollution in it, which is a drinking water issue, an ecological issue. But the Cape Fear River also is a huge driver. It goes, the downtown is built right along it. You've got this nice river walk. Everybody likes to see that. One of the places I go to hike is right along the river, and it's just nice to, people enjoy that amenity. Just from a commerce perspective, there's a huge port. The river allows for, commerce and cargo to come in. So, and people go out there and paddleboard and kayak and fish and all that kind of thing too. So, good local example. So, are there any other places around the country that you want to give a shout out to on how the rivers benefit the economy?
Well, there's lots of other places. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me for kind of some of the other cities that have seen the economic benefits. But, if we want to dive into some of the other amazing benefits that like ecological restoration, thinking about like restoring riparian areas and in-stream habitat, we can dive into some of those. Other examples that are not Colorado focused.
Sure. So that was another great point in your report, or a great section of the report, is the idea that actually cleaning up these rivers is an economic driver, not just because of the end result benefiting tourism or whatever, but the actual work itself. Could you explain that?
Yeah, totally. So, when we think about watershed or ecological restoration, we're thinking about activities like in-stream restoration, restoring, the riparian land or the riverside land around rivers and creeks, and then, removing outdated dams. And those things have really significant, those activities have really significant benefits for the economy. And then they obviously also have additional benefits to the local community, a lot of what we've talked about already. And, I think when I think about the numbers that are associated with actually doing the work of improving river health or riverside land health, there's a lot of jobs that are associated with those two and a lot of really significant economic benefits. So one fact that we comment about in our report is that, in 2015, Todd Denbor and his co-authors found that ecological restoration directly employs over 125,000 workers nationally. And those are people that are actually moving dirt or planting trees, doing the actual work that's specifically associated with, a restoration project. And then there's an additional 95,000 workers that indirectly support those jobs, right? And those two, almost 225,000 jobs together contributes $25 billion to the economy annually. So that's another big beat, right? So there's a lot of money that's flowing into the economy and jobs that are created because of river and watershed restoration.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one of the big parts of your report was also saying to Congress, hey, we're at a moment here, right, with coronavirus, with the situation with the economy, with needing to deliver on equity, where rivers can be a vehicle, river restoration can be a vehicle for progress in those areas. You all have some ideas for funding and policy for river restoration. Could you outline those for me?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. So, one of the things that in this report that we talk about, and I think that kind of one of the most important things, like you said, is this kind of framework for Congress and how we recommend that they would invest to, help get our economy back on track, address some of our most pressing challenges, and then also, improve rivers, which are such a vital asset for communities across the country. So we recommend that Congress invest $500 billion for rivers and clean water over the next 10 years. And we recommend that there's an initial investment of $50 billion to really address some of the urgent infrastructure needs that are associated with COVID-19, and then also thinking about and providing funding for some of the shovel-ready projects that are ready to improve flood management and restore rivers across the country. And we break it down even further, and there's all of this information, if you want to learn more, is available on our website. But we break it down into kind of three main areas. So improve water infrastructure. So we recommend that Congress invest $200 billion over 10 years to do things like improving water infrastructure and prioritizing funding where it's needed most. So that means things like, developing water assistance programs that ensure basic levels of water and sewer services are available and affordable for all communities. And that, that funding is there and is ready, and that there's also funding for water infrastructure improvements and maintenance. Then our second kind of big area is modernize flood management. And similarly, we recommend that Congress invest $200 billion over 10 years to provide investments that are going to make a pretty significant shift from our outdated flood management approach to kind of a more integrated flood management approach that prioritizes, equitable multi-benefit solutions that ensure that all communities are resilient to flooding. And so that looks at a lot of things like natural infrastructure and in when you're considering flood management and climate and community resiliency. And then our third bucket is restore watersheds in our communities. And so that's, thinking about here we recommend, $100 billion over 10 years to restore rivers, to make agriculture more sustainable, and to improve recreation opportunities. So that thinks about things like, making sure that we have integrated water management plans that consider, all aspects of river and water use and thinks about climate change. It thinks about including things like developing a new civilian conservation corps that would restore rivers and riparian that's a hard word for me to say, riparian habitat, and would improve recreational access. And, those three buckets are really important. However, we can't just invest in those, right? We need to do more than that. And so it's also vital that when we invest in these solutions, that we are investing equitably. Any future investments need to have criteria that are associated with them that ensure that funding is more sustainable, that it is more equitable for Americans from coast to coast. So, we recommend that that funding is equitably distributed, that you prioritize communities that are routinely underinvested in, that you develop an employment track that targets people that are underemployed, particularly in those communities that have experienced underinvestment. And then we also recommend that Congress prioritize projects that are going to create high quality jobs and bolster local economies, but also improve the health of rivers, right, and their surrounding lands. Like, we can't degrade these assets that we've just spent, 20 some minutes talking about. And we really need to do more to improve and restore these areas that are so important for communities across the country and provide, so many benefits.
Yeah. I love the idea of like a modern civilian conservation corps, right? Like 100 years ago, it put a ton of people to work. Some of the outcome of the work, like you talked about dams and so forth, not the best, but incredible progress was able to be made on projects. And this is the time when our environment and economy needs that type of jolt again, when it comes to water and climate resilience and all that kind of good stuff. So, Faye, I really appreciate your time. And I hope to meet you in person on a river somewhere someday.
I would love that.
Thank you so much. And we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And just a quick plug, if people do find our report, you can find it at americanrivers.org/invest in rivers. And there you can read the report. We have tons of really cool kind of graphics and communications things that are associated with it. And then you can take action there as well. So really appreciate it.
Action's always good. I do love the new posters, right? Like that show, they're kind of that old style poster, tourism poster thing, but it's showing just rivers and how awesome they are in many ways. So great. Faye, thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks so much, Travis. Talk to you soon.
Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.
The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish choice for conserving water, energy, and money while enjoying an invigorating shower. Use promo code WATERLOOP for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
You're in the Waterloop. Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.